Hello, my name is Freddie Ching. I am with the pro-democracy movement here in Hong Kong, and as we stand here in the cold streets of Hong Kong, I really just want to give out my thanks and to express my warm appreciation to the people of America and to all the peoples who are standing and supporting the cause for liberation, self-determination, and freedom and democracy here for the people of Hong Kong. And I also want to wish all of you a Happy New Year. Let this year of 2020, be a year for the cause of freedom and self-determination and democracy, not only for the people of Hong Kong, but for people all around the world, including the people of Tibet, all the Uyghur people who are also standing against the tyranny and despotism of the communist government of China. Let this year be a year for the struggle, for liberation, for all. For Hong Kong. Hong Kong forever.
I am pleased to be able to leave you and Hong Kong with a special gift tonight.
Hong Kong forever.
To Hong Kong, forever.
So there's been a lot of talk about Hong Kong, of course, in the West, specifically and especially the Anglo world. There is a tremendous amount of sympathy for the Hong Kong protesters, and they're calling it the pro-democracy movement here in Hong Kong, where people are fighting for their freedom against the evil Communist Republic of China. And we're acting as if the protesters in Hong Kong are just wonderful angels who want to fight for their self-determination. So the protesters have been going at it since June of 2019. And I have to specify 2019 because, hey, in a few hours, well, in just some hours, in a matter of hours, it's going to be 2020. So yeah, we are now transitioning from one decade to another decade. It's quite surreal, actually, how fast time goes. But these guys in Hong Kong have been at it since June of 2019 because they were very upset about a proposed bill called the Fugitive Offenders Bill, and this is essentially an extradition bill. And it would allow, if it was passed, it would allow the mainland Chinese government in Beijing to extradite criminals who are hiding in Hong Kong. And criminals go to Hong Kong to hide there because, well, Hong Kong has its own autonomy and it has semi-independence from Beijing, which allows Hong Kong to be very, very wealthy because it is an extremely capitalistic city and it is really free from a lot of the anti-capitalistic measures of China, so it's a lot more thriving. And these people are protesting because, well, they were protesting about this bill because they were concerned, and rightfully so, that this bill would be used to justify extraditing political dissidents. And so they protested very, very intensely, and then in September of 2019, the Fugitive Offenders Bill was withdrawn by the government of Carrie Lam, who is the chief executive of Hong Kong. So the bill has been withdrawn, and it hasn't been established. It hasn't been passed. But these protesters are still going at it. They're still continuing and perpetuating these protests, and they are intensifying it, in fact. And it has been expected that these protesters are going to be blocking and preventing and disrupting New Year's celebrations in Hong Kong. These people are claiming that they want to see the betterment for the people of Hong Kong, but have they really been a help, or have they been more of a disaster for the city of Hong Kong? For one thing, there's been a lot of violence done by these protesters. You can see videos of this on Twitter. There's a plethora of videos that you can see. There's one video of protesters lighting a man on fire because he dared express disagreement to these protesters, and they tried to murder him. And of course, you have all of the Hong Kong nationalists on Twitter saying, "Oh, it's fake, it never happened, it's all fake. This was done by a police officer, not done by protesters, done by a police officer." And well, when you read the reports on the story, you'll find out that this guy suffered pretty intense burns, high-degree burning on his flesh. And then you have one video of protesters attacking a police officer, and they cornered this cop, and they're hitting him with sticks. It's pretty bad. And then you have, of course, typical videos of destruction of property. There's one video of a cop being knifed by a protester right on his neck. They go right behind him. The protester goes right behind him, stabs him on the side of the neck, slices him on the side of the neck with his blade. Yeah, pro-democracy. This is pro-democracy. Just like the French Revolution was all about freedom. I really hate protesters. I know that sounds like harsh, and it sounds very, it sounds like a very like rash thing to say, or a very crazy thing to say. It's like, it sounds like I'm shooting from the hip, but I hate protesters. I don't like them. Yeah, there's some demonstrations that are just, and they're for a good cause. There's no doubt about that. But for the most part, protesters are jerks. They are attention seekers, and I really don't like them. I can't stand the sight of them. I don't like the way they talk. You see them with their, the hard helmets and the big glasses, and they're like, we're here in France in the Yellow Vest movement, and we all here, these people are very angry with the government because the government has been doing harsh measures on the people here. Oh my God, a brick just fell. Or you'll see the yellow hat, the yellow hard hat, and the big goggles, and we're here in Hong Kong watching these people struggling for democracy against the tyrannical communist Chinese government. Yes, the Chinese government is tyrannical. Yes, the Chinese government is communist. I don't like the Chinese government. But here is the thing about protesters and protests in general that people never really think about, and that is the fact that protests are an industry. There is an industry of the demonstration, and that industry is all about exploiting real grievances that people may be suffering and may be remonstrating about, and taking advantage of them for their own agendas. People take real grievances that do exist and that people are suffering under, and they use them to justify their own agenda. They have their own motivations that have nothing to do with the cause that they are claiming to be fighting for, and have everything to do with some sort of sinister, diabolical, and nefarious motivation, envisioning, and aspiration. That is the reality of the industry of the demonstration, the industry of protesting. It always has some sort of diabolical means. Even a lot of pro-life rallies. Now, the pro-life cause is very just. The whole anti-abortion thing is very, very good. I have no problem with that. But here is my problem with the pro-life movement. My problem is not with the average folks who are doing the protesting, or they're holding up the signs against abortion. They're saying abortion is murder or something like that. My problem is not with those folks. My problem is with the people who are organizing and who are in charge of the entire movement, because when it comes down to really outlawing abortion, those people will object to it. And we have seen this time and time again. We saw this in Poland. We saw this in Oklahoma. We've seen this numerous times. They will object to it and they'll say, well, we're not ready for that yet. The society isn't ready for that yet. And the whole reality of it is that they simply want to perpetuate the pro-life movement because that is a big business. So there is an industry. There is an industry behind all of this. It's either for money or it's for some sort of political end. Now, the Hong Kong movement has been destructive for the Hong Kong economy. This is a reality, and there are many, many reports on this that can prove this. For example, there was a guy who came up recently by the name of Richard Harris. He is the chief executive of consulting investment management firm Port Shelter Investment. And this is what he had to say recently. He said, quote, "We're now seeing really what can only be described as mindless vandalism from the radical protesters." There was a recent report from CNBC that stated, quote, "Thousands of protesters blocked roads and public transportation routes to Hong Kong International Airport and said they hoped to draw the world's attention to their pro-democracy movement. Demonstrators were tearing down CCTV cameras, throwing tear canisters back at the police, and flipping metal fences onto the rail tracks, leaving many arrival passengers stranded in the airport for hours." And here's the thing, Hong Kong is a major tourist site. It's a big tourist site. A huge part of its economy is due to tourism, is dependent on tourism. And tourism has gone down significantly in 2019 because of these protesters, because of all the chaos that comes about from the protesting and the demonstrating. And you are wrecking that economy. I thought you were for Hong Kong and the people of Hong Kong. Why are you ruining businesses for people in Hong Kong if you're all for the if you're all for the Hong Kong people. And here's the thing, all these Americans and these Brits and these Australian people and other Westerners who are just, hey, the Hong Kong movement for democracy. If you saw this sort of demonstrating in your own country, would you honestly be sitting there saying, oh, this is amazing? If you saw somebody stabbing a police officer, lighting a man on fire for simply disagreeing with protesters, attacking cops with metal sticks, if you saw that stuff in the United States, would you honestly be sitting there saying, this is amazing for democracy? If this was done by Black Lives Matter or some left-wing movement, some Occupy Wall Street movement, would you honestly be sitting there telling me about democracy and freedom and the right of assembly and the right to demonstrate and protest? You would be sitting there saying, oh, I hope those cops shoot those protesters and use live ammunition on it. And you know damn well that I'm right. And here's another thing. Americans and British people and Westerners, they are expressing sympathy for Hong Kong. Oh, poor Hong Kong, suffering so much under evil China. Hong Kong is one of the wealthiest places on the face of the earth. There are more multi-millionaires in the city of Hong Kong than in New York City. Hong Kong is one of the wealthiest places in the world. It is one of the financial centers of the earth. It's basically a giant offshore banking city. The British were like, hey, yeah, we'll leave China, but hey, you gotta give us Hong Kong. And all these old British guys are putting all their money in Hong Kong. All these major multinational corporations, they put their money in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is one of these financial centers of the earth. It's like Switzerland or Liechtenstein. And we're supposed to believe that they're suffering? This is like when Jewish people in America say, oh, there's so much anti-Semitism in the United States. The Jews in America are literally the wealthiest ethnic group in the entire country. And they want to talk about anti-Semitism in the United States? There are more reports on the damage that the protests have done to the Hong Kong economy. Here is a report from The Guardian, which is a UK publication, and we all know the UK is very sympathetic to the people of Hong Kong. Quote, Hong Kong is expected to slump further into recession. This quarter, GDP is forecast to have shrank in October to December for the third quarter running due to the pro-democracy protests that have been raging for months. Hong Kong's Finance Secretary Paul Chan warned that, quote, based on the situation of these few months, it is inevitable that negative growth will continue. This means that the government will be less flexible in using financial resources under an economic recession. The protest movement is even expected to intensify its efforts this week, with demonstrations expected to disrupt shopping around New Year's celebrations. The Hong Kong economy has been significantly hurt by the Hong Kong protests, as it had to create an economic support package and lower its GDP forecast. This was reported by CNBC. Quote, Hong Kong's government announced an economic support package worth 19.1 billion in the Hong Kong currency, which is 2.44 billion in American, on Thursday, as escalating political protests and the prolonged Sino-US trade war weigh heavily on the Asian financial center. Financial Secretary Paul Chan unveiled the plan at a news conference after saying the government is expecting to lower its 2019 GDP growth forecast to 0% to 1% from the original 2 to 3%. This is huge. From 2 to 3% GDP to 0 to 1% GDP. This is humongous. And here's another thing. Notice what the CNBC report has stated. This has damaged the Hong Kong government, Hong Kong economy, on top of the U.S. trade war, on top of all the effects that have emanated from the U.S. trade war. So if you think about it, like the U.S. trade war has been hurting the Chinese economy, and now this comes up at the same exact time. This is not a coincidence, my friends. I believe that the Hong Kong protests have something to do with U.S. foreign policy. Oh, you're blaming America. I think the Americans, probably the British, are exploiting the situation, and they're probably doing stuff to advance it. We all know CIA is all over the world. Remember, not too long ago, there were all these riots happening in Iran. This was last year. All these riots were happening in Iran. CIA was crawling all over Iran, all over Tehran. Then recently, you had these very intense protests going on in Iran and Iraq. They're still going on. And Iran, the Iranian government said, hey, we got like 8 Iranian activists with ties to the CIA. And if you say, oh, it's just Iranian propaganda, then please tell me, why did Mike Pompeo say that we're getting tens of thousands of pieces of intelligence from Iran over these protests? Who's providing Mike Pompeo with all this intelligence? What does CIA stand for? Central Intelligence Agency. Intelligence. Where's all that intelligence coming from? Oof. I'm willing to guess. Now here's another thing. A big part of these Hong Kong protests is nationalism, is separatism and tribalism. There is a lot of intense hatred between the Hong Kong people and the mainland Chinese people. Mainland Chinese people speak Mandarin. Hong Kongers speak Cantonese. So there's a lot of intense tribalism that goes on between the two, and there's even a pejorative racial term that Hong Kongers will use when describing mainland Chinese people. They call them locusts, and I don't remember the Cantonese term, but in English it's literally locusts. A lot of people in Hong Kong are upset that signs are translated into Mandarin as well. Kind of like how when you go to Canada, all the signs are in English, but underneath they have French translations. A lot of people in Hong Kong are upset about this. They actually did a poll recently, and it showed that over 50%, I want to say 56% of people in Hong Kong support the Hong Kong protesters, and over a third of that, over 50%, said that they have actually partaken in these protests. 30% say that they are opposed to the protesters. 30% is a minority, but nonetheless it is a substantial minority, which means that there are a lot of people in Hong Kong who are against this sort of nationalistic protestations and demonstrations. And that significant number, you can't just ignore them. They have their own reasons for opposing the Hong Kong protests. And I think we should listen to those reasons, because they're probably the ones saying, hey, my business is being ruined, or other people's businesses are being ruined. The economy is being ruined by this. The GDP of Hong Kong is being ruined by this, being diminished by this. So we have to take heed to this and listen to those people, not just to the tyranny of the mob and to the tyranny of the majority. 17% of the people who were polled said that they are, in fact, for separatism, that they are for Hong Kong being independent from mainland China. They want to see a Hong Kong state. Now, 17% is a minority, but still it is a substantial number. And it really shows that tribalism and separatist sentiments have intensified in Hong Kong. Now, separatism is a big part of this movement. There is a major activist who has been working for separatism, and he has been involved in the protest movement. His name is Andy Chan Ho Teen, and he is an activist, and he is the founding member of the Hong Kong National Party, which was the first party to advocate for Hong Kong independence. And Andy Chan Ho Teen, he in fact attended a rally and a press conference, and he talked about the protests, and he expressed his support for the protesters. And this rally and this press conference, they were in fact organized by and this is very significant, an organization that is ran by a Japanese nationalist. This organization is called Free Indo-Pacific Alliance, or FIPA, F-I-P-A. Now, FIPA is not only ran by a Japanese nationalist. The president of FIPA is Rabia Kadir, who is the main face of the Uyghur separatist movement, which is also very dangerous. Now, the Chinese government has been persecuting the Uyghurs in a very unjust and oppressive way. There's no doubt about that. But again, you're always going to have these types of agents and activists who will use the real suffering of people as a way to justify a certain agenda. In this case, it's separatism. Now, the vice president of FIPA is Hidetoshi Ishii, who is a Japanese nationalist who is also working to revive the ideology of militarism in Japan against China. Now, get this. Ishii is the husband of a very popular Japanese nationalist on the internet. Her name is Yoko Ishii. Now, a number of years ago, Yoko Ishii became somewhat famous on the internet because she actually had made a video literally worshiping Donald Trump and saying, "Oh, please look at me, Donald. Please talk to me, Mr. Trump."
Hi, Trump Senpai. How are you doing? I am Yoko. I am a Japanese living in Japan, and today I wanted to make a video for you again because I want you, Trump Senpai, to not test me already.
And, of course, you had all the 4chaners and all the Asian fetishizers go, "Oh, Mrs. Ishii, she's so beautiful." The reality is that she looks like a freaking psychopath. And so she's a big nationalist. In fact, she made a video mocking people for talking about Nanking, mocking the Chinese for insisting that Japan talk about Nanking and recognize what happened in the massacre of Nanking during the Second World War. Kind of like how Armenians are pushing for the Turks to recognize the Armenian genocide. This woman is a huge, vicious, jingoist nationalist, and her husband is as well. In fact, her husband has talked about Japan being a leader in Asia and reviving its military strength and reinvigorating its military strength to defend Japan against China, when in reality, all what these nationalists really want is to revive their empire. And that means more death and suffering. So you have these protesters who have been very violent. They have been perpetuating the violence. They have been a damage for the GDP and economy of Hong Kong. They have been really more of a trouble than a help for the people of Hong Kong. And secondly, you have Japanese nationalists. And also, here's another thing, almost forgot to mention this. When you look up the headquarters for FIPA, FIPA has 2 headquarters. One is in Washington, D.C., and the second one is in Tokyo, Japan. What are the odds? And if you look at the location for FIPA on Google Maps, it's smack right next to the White House. So what we're seeing is an American-Japanese operation to exploit the protests, to use them for their own advantage. And I think what the Japanese want to do is cause enough chaos in China that the Japanese would then have the excuse and the pretext to say, we need to go to China for some sort of peacekeeping mission. Before you know it, Japanese soldiers are in China. Before you know it, the Japanese are refusing to leave. Before you know it, you have a war. And if you think that this is far-fetched, then let's talk about one of the factors that led to the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. Japanese soldiers went to China because the Japanese government took the anti-foreign protests that were taking place in China at the time to their advantage. There was a Japanese guy who was beheaded by Chinese Muslims, and the Japanese sent their soldiers into China, and then they refused to leave. And eventually the Japanese had a war with Russia because the Russians were an ally with China, and this was the Russo-Japanese War, and the Japanese defeated the Russians. So if you look at the history, you can see a parallel as to how people strategize for their own geopolitical ends. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the Hong Kong protests. I don't like protesters. I think they're schmucks. And yeah, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.